They told you the crown jewels are the most protected objects on Earth. They were right. What they, didn't tell you, what nobody told you, is that protection sometimes means hiding. I guess sometimes it means lying. And sometimes it means a single guard, standing alone in a corridor that doesn't appear on any palace blueprint, holding a letter, I guess, written in a 14-year-old girl's handwriting, deciding in the space of 30 seconds whether the monarchy lives or dies by morning. This is not a story about kings and queens. It's a story about the people who stand between them and everything else. You think you know what a royal guard does. I mean, you've seen the photographs, the bearskin hats, stone faces outside Buckingham Palace. Plus, tourists pressing, in my opinion, their noses 6 inches from a man who hasn't blinked in 40 minutes. It looks ceremonial. Kind of. It looks decorative. It looks, if you're being honest, a little absurd. That's, for what it's worth, exactly what it's supposed to look like. Because the ones who matter, the ones this story is actually about, don't stand outside for photographs. They stand inside. In the corridors you never see. At, the doors that aren't on the visitor maps. In rooms where the only witness to what they do is a security camera that, coincidentally, stopped recording at 11:47 p.m. on the night in question. Sergeant Daniel Marsh has served the crown for 19 years. He has stood at the bedside of a dying monarch. He has escorted a king through a crowd that wanted him dead. He has held secrets that would unravel governments. And he has held them the way good men hold terrible things, quietly and completely alone. He has never broken, not once, which until the night he found what was locked in Camillas' vault, until the night he read Charlotte's letter. What you're about to read wasn't meant to reach you. It wasn't meant actually to reach anyone. 3 people know what happened in those corridors between the 14th and 15th of November, and one of them will never speak again. Marsh, agreed to tell his account on one condition, that you understand, before a single word of it, that he doesn't regret what he did. He just needs someone to know why. I have a habit that my wife calls neurotic, and my commanding officer calls a liability. I write things down. Not reports. Those are mandatory, sanitized, designed for the record, and therefore designed, are in their own quiet institutional way to say nothing. I mean the other things. The things that, fall between the lines of official language. I carry a small black notebook, the kind you can buy in any W.H. Smith for £2.49, and I have filled 43 of them over my 19 years in close protection. Dates, times, observations, the smell of a room, the way a man's hand moved when he thought no one was watching, which guard blinked first when the motorcade turned the wrong way. My name is Lieutenant Aldous Fenn, and I'm, or was before November the 14th, the duty oversight officer for the night rotation at Windsor. Not a guard myself, sort of, an observer. A counter, essentially, and I count guards, I count discrepancies, I count the seconds between a reported event and the response to it. If a guard is 3 minutes late to his post, I write it down. If a camera angle is wrong by 7 degrees, I write it down. If a woman who outranks me by 4 institutional layers walks through a corridor at a time when she's no operational reason to be in that corridor, I write it down. That is how this started. Because I wrote it down. The 14th of November was the late king's birthday, observed, not celebrated, not officially. The palace doesn't, I think, celebrate the birthdays of monarchs who are no longer living. But it observes them, which is a different thing. And the difference matters enormously in an institution where the space between form and feeling is handled as carefully as a minefield. There were small ceremonies, flowers placed in specific locations by specific people at specific times. A silence, I guess, is kept in the guard room at 9 a.m. Nothing that would register to an outsider. Everything that mattered to the people inside. I noted the atmosphere as I began my shift at 10 p.m. Windsor in November has a particular quality. Not quite cold enough to be brutal, but cold in the way that gets into the bones slowly, the way grief does, the way old buildings store it in their stone. The long corridor, I guess, smelled of beeswax and something underneath it, something older. I always think on the late king's birthday that the place smells like memory, and then I write that down and feel embarrassed by it and cross it out. I did not cross it out this time. My first irregularity of the night, and I use irregularity the way a doctor uses concerning to mean something really worse, came at 22:17. Sergeant Daniel Marsh wasn't at his post. And this requires some explanation, because not at his post means something very specific when applied to Daniel Marsh. He is like, I choose the present tense deliberately, the kind of man who creates order simply by being present in a space. 19 years of service, not a single formal reprimand, commended 3 times. The last commendation signed by a hand that no longer signs anything. His, I think, file is so clean it makes other files look shabby by comparison. When new officers rotate through Windsor for their orientation, Marsh is the standard they're measured against, usually without being told this directly, because that's also how this institution operates. By implication, by example, by the weight of men like Marsh simply standing somewhere and being what they're. He wasn't at his post. I checked the camera feeds. Actually, and I checked the log. Plus I walked, the corridor myself, which is not strictly within my duties but falls under the broad heading of oversight, which is vague enough to cover most things. I checked, basically, the relief schedule. Plus I checked the adjacents, the 3 posts nearest to his designated station that might plausibly explain an authorized movement. Nothing. I should have logged it immediately and escalated. That is the protocol. An unexplained absence from post by a guard of Marsh's clearance level is a Category B incident. Not a lockdown, not yet, but a documented anomaly requiring a supervisor response within 15 minutes. I have initiated Category B protocols 11 times in my career. I know the process the way I know the route to my own kitchen. Instead, I walked further down the corridor. Plus, I'm still not entirely certain why. There was something in the texture of that night, the birthday observation, the atmosphere, the particular quality of Windsor in November. That made the mechanical response feel wrong in a way I could not articulate, into protocol language. I wrote it down later as intuition, and then wrote next to it in parentheses, insufficient justification do not include in formal report. I found him 22 meters past his designated station, at the entrance to a service corridor that I'd, over 4 years of duty oversight at Windsor, never once had reason to enter. He was standing perfectly still, which his back was to me. His posture was parade ground correct, chin level, shoulders square, hands at his sides, weight centered. If I'd been looking at him from the front, I'd have said he was at his post. From behind, there was something in the set of his shoulders that was different from duty stillness. Duty stillness is, neutral, held, preserved. I guess this was something else. A kind of rigid concentration, the way a man stands when he's holding himself together by deliberately making his body a structure. Basically, Marsh, I said. He turned. Not the snap of a caught man. The slow, controlled turn of someone who had known I was there for at least 30 seconds and had been deciding something. His face was, I have written and deleted several descriptions. The most accurate, is this. He looked like a man who had just been handed information that reorganized the world he lived in and hadn't yet finished deciding what to do about it. In his left hand was a key, and not a standard Windsor issue key. Those are electronic, card format, logged on the security system. This was old, like brass, I think, the kind of key that belongs to a lock that was installed before anyone thought to put a key card reader next to it. Sir, he said, you're 22 meters from your post, Marsh. Yes, sir. Want to tell me why? He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the door behind him, a door I'd genuinely not noticed before, set flush into the paneling in. The way that Windsor occasionally hides things, structurally unremarkable until you're standing in front of it and wondering why it has no camera above it. "I found something I wasn't supposed to find," he said. "That is the kind of sentence that has no protocol. There's no form for it. And there's no box on any incident report that accommodates found something not supposed to find as a reason for post-absence." I stood there for a moment, notebook in my coat pocket, pen between my fingers where it always is, and I was aware of a specific sensation I have learned to pay attention to over 19 years. The feeling that whatever I wrote down next was going to matter for a long time. "Show me," I said, and the corridor on the other side of the door wasn't on any plan I'd ever seen. I have been thorough about Windsor's layout. It is part of the job, and I'm, as I said, the kind of man who's thorough. I have studied the architectural records, the Victoriana additions, the post-war renovations. I have read the service corridor documentation. I, for what it's worth, know where the hidden passages are that aren't secret, and the ones used by housekeeping, the ones that exist because a palace built over 9 centuries accumulates infrastructure the way a body accumulates scar tissue. This corridor wasn't TBH on any of those records. It was short, perhaps 8 meters, and it ended in a room that was small enough that 2 men standing in it felt crowded. Stone walls, older than the Victorian paneling in the corridor behind us. A pretty much single electric light that looked like it had been retrofitted sometime in the mid-20th century. And along the left wall, built into the stone with the kind of solidity that suggests it was never meant to move, a vault. Not a safe. A vault. Steel-faced, combination locked, old combination. The rotating dial kind, not digital. Mounted for what it's worth. Beside it, at eye level, a plaque. Brass, like the key, art engraved. "In for what it's worth, service of the crown, plus in confidence of the blood, in trust of those who stand when others sit." I looked at Marsh, which, "How did you find this?" "I've been here before," he said. "Not often, plus 3 times in 19 years. Each time I was told to come by someone who outranked me considerably." "And tonight?" "Tonight I came on my own." The way he said it, not with defiance, but with the flat certainty of a man who has made a decision that cannot be unmade, made me stop asking questions for a moment and simply look at him. There's something about Marsh's face that I haven't ised before and always failed to describe adequately. He is not a handsome man in any conventional sense. His nose has been broken at least once, improperly reset. There's a scar, honestly, and at the corner of his jaw that he has never explained. He is 51 years old and looks it in the way that men who have done real things look their age. Not worn out, but marked. Accurate. His face, in that small room, was doing something I'd only seen it do once before, in a surveillance photograph from 2019 that I wasn't supposed to have seen and subsequently did not include in any report. He was afraid TBH. "The crown is missing," he said. "Not the regalia. The people who track the regalia know it's in its case. I mean the consort's crown. The TBH, one that was placed in private storage after the coronation. The one that sort of was logged and sealed and hasn't been physically verified since." He paused. "I'd reason to believe it had been moved. I came to check." "And?" He looked at the vault. "It's actually in there," he said. But there's something in there with it that isn't supposed to be." I waited. "A letter," he said, "written by Princess Charlotte. She was 14, look, when she wrote it. I know the date because I was on duty the afternoon she must have come down here." He stopped. "I think," started again. "Sir, well, the letter is addressed to the person who takes the crown out of that vault without authorization. It's addressed to whoever comes looking." The electric light hummed. Somewhere above us, through stone and centuries, Windsor was breathing its enormous, indifferent breath. I took out my notebook. "Start from the beginning," I said. "Tell me everything." He hadn't iced the discrepancy 6 weeks earlier. Not a dramatic discovery. That's not how things work at this level. It, in my opinion, was, in Marsh's account, the accumulation of small wrongnesses that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. A log entry time-stamped 3 minutes before the camera covering that section of corridor went briefly offline. A requisition for an access code update submitted by an office that had no operational reason to interface with the private storage protocols. The, way a particular housekeeper, a woman who had worked at Windsor for 11 years and who Marsh described as the kind of person who you stop noticing because they're always exactly where they're supposed to be, had stopped being exactly where she was supposed to be. Guards notice these things. That is, I think, the element of the profession that never quite makes it into the public understanding of what a royal guard does. The bearskin hat, the motionlessness, the ceremonial gravitas, those are the visible surface. Underneath them is an almost pathological attentiveness to the normal. You cannot notice the abnormal unless you have cataloged the normal so precisely that any, in my opinion, deviation registers the way a wrong note registers in a piece of music you know by heart. Marsh knew Windsor by heart. He hadn't reported the discrepancies. I asked him why. He was quiet for a moment, and I noted the pause. 3 seconds, perhaps 4, in the way I note everything. "Because," he said, "the log entry that started it was in a name I recognized. And if I was right about what it meant, reporting it through the standard channel would have been the same as telling the person I was suspicious of that I was suspicious." "Whose name?" He told me. For what it's worth, that won't write it here. I wrote it in my notebook, on a page that I subsequently removed and placed in a location that's not Windsor, not my home, and not anywhere connected to my service record. This is the first time in 43 notebooks that I have done that. I mention it not because I intend to explain further, but because I think it is the kind of detail that deserves to exist somewhere, in some form, attached to this account. I needed to verify the crown was still in the vault before I could do anything, Marsh continued. If it was there, the discrepancy was explicable. Someone had accessed the storage protocols for a legitimate reason, and the camera coincidence was exactly that. Coincidence. But if it had been moved... "The letter," I said. "I guess." "The letter," he said. He had opened the vault 20 minutes before I found him. He, in my opinion, had a combination, written in his handwriting on a piece of paper that had been tucked inside the lining of his dress uniform, for, by his estimate, 11 years. Given to him by someone senior on an occasion he described only as the kind of occasion you don't ask questions during, and told to memorize it and destroy the paper, which he hadn't done because he's, as he put it with a brevity that I found striking, a man who keeps things. The crown was there, placed exactly as it should have been in its case, in its position, correctly stored. The letter was placed on top of the case, unsealed, folded once. He had read it, which he read it to me. I'm going to set it down exactly, as he recited it, from memory. Because Marsh has the kind of memory that makes the rest of us feel like we are living in a fog. He told me, when I asked if he was certain he had it word for word, that some things you read once and never stop reading. The letter said, "If you have found this, then what I was worried about is true, and you're the person I was hoping would find it. I'm not allowed to explain in this letter what I know. I have been told very clearly that what I know is not mine to act on, and that my understanding of what's proper and what's necessary will improve as I get older." That may be true. I'm 14, and people who are older than me tell me this fairly often. But I'm also my mother's daughter, and my grandmother's granddaughter, and the women in my family have a habit of noticing things that are inconvenient and refusing to pretend otherwise. To be fair, crown in this vault is not merely a crown. It was placed here in confidence of a promise that was made before I was born. The promise concerns what happens if a certain kind of pressure is applied to a certain kind of person in a certain kind of circumstance. I won't say more than that because I do not know more than that, and I refuse to speculate in writing. What I'll say is this: the person who told me about this vault, the promise, and the crown did not do so because they wanted me to act. They did it because they wanted me to know. There's a difference, they said, between a secret kept in darkness and a secret kept in trust. I'm trusting you. Whoever you're standing in the right place. That matters. Like, it has always mattered. Charlotte pretty much, the electric light hummed. I looked at the crown in its case. I looked at Marsh. Plus, my notebook was open. My pen was in my hand. I'd written nothing for the last 4 minutes. She came down here, I said. A 14-year-old girl came down here and put a letter in a vault and didn't tell anyone. She told someone, Marsh said. She told whoever comes looking. I closed my notebook. There are 43 of them, filled with things that fall between the lines of official language. I have never, in any of them, written down a sentence that felt like it might constitute treason. I have never stood in a room and felt the institutional floor shift beneath me in a way that made me uncertain whether the ground I was about to step onto was the right ground or simply the familiar one. That night, in that room, I wasn't uncertain for very long. But I looked at Marsh and said, "You came down here alone?" "Yes, sir." "Before you contacted me?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that I have, since November the 14th, found myself returning to at intervals that I do not track precisely because some thoughts do not benefit from being logged. Because, he said, I wanted to know if it was still there before I decided whether to tell anyone. If it was gone, there wasn't anything to tell. And if it was here, he stopped, started again. If it was here, and the letter was here, then someone put that letter there hoping the right person would find it. And you wanted to know, I said, if you were the right person. He looked at me. His face was doing the thing again, the reorganizing thing. The thing I have only seen once before in a photograph I wasn't supposed to have seen. I wanted to, I think, know, he said, if we were. I did not sleep that night. This is not a remarkable statement. Duty oversight officers at Windsor do not sleep during shifts, that's basically, rather the point. But I mean something more specific than the professional fact. I mean that after we left the vault, after Marsh secured the corridor and returned to his post with the kind of unhurried deliberateness that's, in retrospect, its own form of performance, after I filed a brief and deliberately uninformative night report that I have since read back 3 times and found genuinely impressive in its capacity to mean nothing, after all of that, I sat in the oversight room with a cold cup of tea and my notebook open to the page where Charlotte's letter was written in my handwriting, and I did not sleep because I could not locate the part of my mind that sleep requires. The part that believes tomorrow will be more or less like today. I'm a creature of institutional logic. I want to be precise about this because it matters for understanding everything that followed. My father was a civil servant. His father before him, there's a photograph on my desk, not at Windsor, at home, of my grandfather accepting a commendation from a man whose name I recognize from history lessons, and my grandfather's expression in that photograph is one I have identified over time as the expression of a man who's proud not of himself in particular, but of the thing he represents. Did the continuous, competent functioning of a structure larger than any individual within it. I have worn that expression. I know exactly what it feels like, which it is an expression that doesn't survive the kind of night that November the 14th was. Marsh, sort of. came to find me at 06:30. He was off rotation by then, should have been heading to his quarters, but he appeared in the door of the oversight room in civilian clothes, a dark jacket, no tie, and said, with the economy of a man who has already spent the night making decisions, "I need to tell you about the housekeeper." I closed my notebook, opened it again, which closed it. "Sit down," I said, which her name was Mrs. Patricia Veal, which is a name I'll write here because it is in the public record, or will be, eventually. In whatever form these things eventually become public. She had worked at Windsor for 11 years, as I mentioned previously. She was, in Marsh's categorization, a background figure, the kind of person that an institution of Windsor's size requires in considerable numbers, reliable and unremarkable. She knew the corridors the way Marsh knew them, which is to say precisely and completely, though for different reasons. Housekeeping staff at Windsor are briefed on areas of restriction and areas of access, with a thoroughness that surprises most people who haven't considered the practical logistics of maintaining a working royal residence. UTBH cannot clean around secrets if you do not know where the secrets are. Mrs. Veal had access as a consequence of her seniority and her 11 years of accumulated trust to a set of service corridors that overlapped significantly with the corridor Marsh had found me standing outside the previous night. "She's not a housekeeper," Marsh said. "Explain." He had been, and I use this word with the understanding that it doesn't appear in any official protocol, watching her. Not systematically, not as part of any authorized investigation. The way a man watches something that's wrong in a way he cannot yet name. The way you keep returning to a detail in a room because something about it doesn't match the room and you haven't yet worked out what. "She cleans the room she's supposed to clean," he said. "But every third Tuesday, roughly, she takes a different route back to the service entrance. Not randomly different, specifically different, and the same different route is every third Tuesday." "You tracked her Tuesdays." "I tracked my own observations," he said, with the precision of a man who understands the legal difference. "I guess I didn't follow her. I noticed the pattern when I was looking at something else." He paused. "She goes past the service corridor, which the one from last night. She doesn't go in. She never goes in. But she slows down, just slightly. The way you slow down when you're checking on something." I thought about that. "How long have you noticed this?" 8 months. "And you didn't report it?" He looked at me with something that wasn't quite patience, but was adjacent to it. "Sir, she slows down, in a corridor, on a Tuesday. The log name I found was, the name is connected to oversight of domestic staff access protocols. If I'd reported a housekeeper slowing down in a corridor and mentioned the log name in the same report, I'd have been flagging a concern to the department responsible for managing the person I was concerned about. The institutional logic of that was, I'd to admit, impeccable. "She's for what it's worth, a lookout," I said. "I honestly think she's something more specific than that." Marsh reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small object on the desk between us. "I found this. In the corridor, on the floor, near the vault door. Last night." It was a key. Brass. Very like the key Marsh had used, but smaller, not identical, a different cut. A copy, or the original of which Marsh's was a copy. I could, for what it's worth, not tell which. "Someone else has been in that vault," Marsh said. And the weight of that sentence took a moment to settle. Not because the idea was incomprehensible, I'd, by this point, reorganized my understanding of the previous night enough to have considered possibilities that I'd have found professionally unthinkable 48 hours earlier. But because the specific implication of a second key in a vault that officially did not exist, connected to a crown that officially wasn't missing, with a letter from a 14-year-old girl addressed to whoever came looking, the implication was that someone had been in that vault and had left before Marsh arrived, and had left behind a key they could not afford to carry. They were interrupted, I said. Or they wanted it to appear they were interrupted, Marsh said. The distinction mattered, look, which I wrote both versions in my notebook, one under the other, and drew a line between them, and then another line under that, and wrote nothing more on that page. You know, the letter, I said. Charlotte's letter was there when you opened the vault. Yes. If someone else had been in there first? They read it, Marsh said, or they placed it, or pretty much both. Or Charlotte placed it years ago and they found it the same way you did, and left it there, because removing it was worse than leaving it. We sat with that for a moment. The oversight room is not a room designed for the kind of conversation we were having. It is designed for the efficient monitoring of roster compliance and camera feeds, and it smells of stale coffee and the particular mustiness of rooms where men have been slightly too warm for a long time. It is, in summary, entirely the wrong room for questions about whether a 14-year-old princess had set a very long, very patient, very precisely calibrated trap. Marsh, I said, what was the promise? He looked at me. The one Charlotte mentioned, in the letter. A promise made before she was born, concerning what happens when a certain kind of pressure is applied to a certain kind of person. I don't know, he said, but you have a theory. The pause this time was longer. 6 seconds, perhaps 7. And I counted because that's what I do, and because the length of Marsh's pauses has come to feel to me like a meaningful unit of measurement. The crown in that vault, he said slowly, was the consort's crown, placed in private storage after the coronation. The official record describes it as stored for preservation, standard protocol for regalia not in regular ceremonial use. He stopped. I guess. But there's another protocol, less standard, older, and it dates to a period when the institution was navigating a particular kind of internal pressure, and certain objects were placed in private storage not for preservation, but for what the documentation from that period calls. He paused again. Take advantage of safekeeping. I hadn't heard that phrase before. Meaning, I said, meaning they were placed somewhere they could be retrieved by the right people at the right moment to highlight something to the right audience. I think, not displayed, not used ceremonially. Used. He met like my eyes. Plus, a crown in a vault with a combination known to 3 people in the institution, with a protocol that means it can be brought out and placed on the right table at the right moment in the right negotiation, is not merely a crown. It is an argument. What argument? Legitimacy, he said simply. Unassailable, physical, historical legitimacy, the kind you cannot manufacture and cannot fake and cannot revoke with a press release or a parliamentary motion, the kind you have to look at. I thought about the plaque beside the vault door, in service of the crown, in confidence of the blood, in trust of those who stand when others sit. Someone, I said kind of, was trying to move that argument, or they were trying to remove it. Marsh's jaw was set in the way it goes when he has arrived at a conclusion and is not enjoying it. If the crown pretty much is no longer in the vault, the argument doesn't exist. And if no one who knows about the vault reports it missing, because reporting it means explaining how they know about it, then whoever moves it controls the silence as well as the object. I put my pen down. What kind of pressure warrants that kind of maneuver? Marsh said nothing. I picked, actually, my pen back up. What kind of pressure, I said again, is someone applying, right now, that makes the removal of an ancient crown from a secret vault seem like a necessary step? He told me what he knew, or rather, and this is the distinction that has occupied me considerably since November, he told me, what he had observed, and I drew the conclusions. He confirmed them with the specific, a contained silence of a man who has been waiting for someone to draw those conclusions for long enough that the relief of it registers on his face before he can stop it. There had been a series of meetings. Not well, unusual in themselves. The machinery of the modern monarchy produces meetings the way a well-maintained engine produces heat, constantly and as a byproduct of normal function. But these meetings had a quality that Marsh hadn't in the way he noticed things. They involved the same three individuals, always three, in configurations that shifted slightly from one meeting to the next. The location changed. The pretext actually changed, which the three people did not. "Who?" I said, which he named them. "I'm not going to write those names here. I'm going to say instead that one of the names was a name I expected." She connected to the log entry I removed from my notebook, and that the other two were names I'dn't expected, and that the unexpected nature of those two names explained, with a clarity I found genuinely distressing, why nothing had surfaced through the standard channels. When you know the people in the meeting are the standard channels do not surface things. "Charlotte," I said. "She's older now. She's not 14 anymore." "No," Marsh said. "She's not." "Does she know about the meetings?" "I don't know what she knows." "But the letter—" "The letter was written when she was 14, Marsh said. 4 years ago. Plus, she wrote it because someone told her something she was too young to act on. She was told to wait and to trust the institution and to be patient." He looked at me steadily. "She left the letter in the vault because she wasn't entirely certain the institution deserved the trust." I thought about a 14-year-old girl coming down to a room that wasn't on any plan, with a key she'd been given by someone she trusted, and writing a letter to a stranger she hadn't met yet. Writing. If you have found this, then what I was worried about is true. Filing it, I think, under the vault, like a dispatch sent ahead of a war that hadn't started yet. "I'm trusting you." "She wasn't asking for rescue," I said. "No," Marsh said. "She was establishing a record, a witness, someone who knew independently of whoever is arranging those meetings, that the crown existed, and the vault existed, and the promise existed. And that someone had read the letter," Marsh said, "which means someone has standing." Standing is in the legal and institutional sense. Standing to act, standing to report, standing to bring a matter to a forum that could not easily dismiss it. A vault that officially doesn't exist, accessed by an officer whose record is immaculate, containing a crown whose current status is now a documented question rather than an unasked one. Charlotte hadn't asked whoever found the letter to act. She had asked them to know, and knowing, in this institution, in this century, at this particular moment of pressure applied in particular ways to particular people, knowing was enough to change the geometry of the situation entirely. Because the people arranging those meetings had made a very specific calculation that the secret would hold, and which that the institution's preference for its own smooth functioning would suppress any inconvenient discovery, that the crown would remain in its vault, officially logged as preserved, functionally removed from any equation, and that no one would ask the question because asking the question required knowing the right question existed. They, for what it's worth, hadn't accounted for Marsh, and specifically, they hadn't accounted for the kind of man who notices a housekeeper slowing down on a Tuesday and writes it down and then keeps it, and then finds a vault with a letter in it and drives all night on the engine of a patience that has been running for 8 months, on nothing but the conviction that the thing he cannot name is real. "What do we do?" I said. Marsh had been waiting for this question. I could see him waiting for it, and I could see the shape of the answer already constructed in his expression, not triumphant, not dramatic, careful, plus the way a man who has handled delicate things for 19 years handles everything. "We don't do anything yet," he said. "The crown is in the vault, and the letter is in the vault. The key they left behind is in my possession. Nothing, honestly, is missing and nothing has happened that we cannot account for. He paused. But I need you to write it down. I looked at him. Everything, he said. Exactly, to be fair, as it happened, and exactly as I've told you. In that notebook of yours, and then I need you to put it somewhere that's in here. And then, he was quiet for a moment. And then, he said, we go about our duties. And we wait. For what? He looked at me, and his face was doing the thing I have now seen 3 times across 19 years, and a photograph I wasn't supposed to see. A thing I have come to understand is not fear exactly, but something that only looks like fear from the outside, because from the inside, it is the expression of a man who has accepted that the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was, and has decided to stand on it anyway. For Charlotte, he said, to make her next move. I went home at 8 o'clock. I drove. I don't usually drive. I live 20 minutes from Windsor by train, but that morning I drove because I wanted the specific sensation of choosing a direction and moving in it, which trains do not provide. I drove, and with my notebook on the passenger seat and the second brass key in my coat pocket, and a sentence in my head that I'dn't yet written down. I wrote it when I got home. It was the sentence Charlotte had ended her letter with. Whoever I guess you're standing in the right place. That matters. It has always mattered. I read it twice, which then I made tea, and sat at my kitchen table and began to write. There are 2 things about Mrs. Patricia Veal that I confirmed over the next 6 days through means that I won't enumerate because several of them weren't strictly within my professional remit, though I note that oversight is, as I have said, a generously vague mandate. The first is that she wasn't, as Marsh had intuited, merely a lookout. She was a keeper. Specifically, she was the 3rd keeper of the vault's combination in the history of that small room, a chain of custodians. That stretched back further than I'd imagined, passed between people who worked at Windsor in unremarkable capacities, people whose very unremarkableness was the point. Housekeepers and footmen and kitchen staff and, once, a man described in the historical record as a clerk of the wardrobe, which sounds decorative until you understand that the wardrobe in question included, at various periods, items of considerably more consequence than clothes. The second is that Mrs., which Veal had received a communication, not by any digital means, nothing traceable, in the week before November the 14th. I found this out through a conversation with a colleague of hers. It's conducted in the way I conduct all conversations I'm not supposed to be conducting, by appearing to be interested in something adjacent and listening carefully to what's said in the space around it. The communication had caused her to alter her Tuesday route. She had gone not past the vault door, but away from it. She had been told to stay away, which meant someone knew she knew about the vault, which meant the 3 people in those meetings were further inside the institution's machinery than Marsh had estimated. I wrote all of this down. I wrote it down twice, once in my notebook, once on separate paper in a form that did not require context to be legible. I placed one copy somewhere I won't specify. I kept the other. On the 7th day, I went back to Windsor for my shift, and when I passed Marsh's post, he gave me the particular version of his professional nod that he uses when a situation is under control. I nodded back. That evening, Charlotte was photographed at a public engagement in London. She, was wearing, and I noticed this because I notice things, because noticing is what I do, a brooch that I'd seen once before, in a portrait, not hers, her grandmother's. The brooch was in the shape of a crown. I did not actually write it down. Some things do not need to be written down. 11 days after November the 14th, the meetings stopped. Not dramatically. Institutions do not stop things dramatically. They allow them to quietly conclude, The way a conversation ends when the room's temperature drops by 2 degrees and everyone agrees, without speaking, to go somewhere else. The three individuals continued to perform their functions. The meetings simply ceased to appear on any calendar I'd access to. And then, as I verified through adjacent means, on any calendar at all. I wrote this down. On the 14th day, I received a communication. It came through a channel that I'll describe only as official and unusual. Official enough that I could not dismiss it. Unusual enough that I understood immediately it hadn't come through the standard routing. It was addressed to me by name. It contained no signature, which it contained 2 sentences. Your night reports for the 14th have been noted by the appropriate parties. Please continue you. Know your duties without modification. I read it standing at the oversight room desk, holding the paper in the way you hold things when you're deciding how alarmed to be. The paper was standard Windsor stationery. The typeface was standard Windsor administrative font. Everything about it was correct, and nothing about it was normal. I put it in my coat pocket next to the second brass key, which I'd continued to carry and hadn't mentioned to anyone since my conversations with Marsh. Then I sat down, opened my notebook to a fresh page, and began to write the sentence, "Please continue your duties without modification" at the top of the page, and then stopped and then wrote below it in smaller letters, "Whose parties?" Marsh and I did not speak for 3 days after that. This wasn't avoidance. We pretty much have worked the same rotation for 4 years, and there are shifts where operational necessity simply doesn't produce overlap. Different corridors, different timing, different rhythms. And the job creates its own distance and its own proximity without consultation. I have gone longer without speaking to Marsh and thought nothing of it. But on those 3 days I thought about it, in the way you think about silences that have changed in quality without changing in duration. To be fair, the 4th day he appeared again in the door of the oversight room. Different time, early evening this time, still in his uniform, his shift not yet finished. He closed the door behind him, which he hadn't done before. "I'd a visitor," he said. And he said this the way he says most things, level, uninflected, the sentence delivered as a fact rather than a drama, and the drama contained in the fact itself. "Who?" "An equerry, from the senior household." He paused. "Not one I'd dealt with before, basically young, new appointment." As I think, I'd have seen him otherwise. The corner of his jaw moved slightly. He was nervous. What did he want? He wanted to confirm that I'd found nothing of concern during my duties on the 14th and had no outstanding matters to report. I was quiet for a moment. "And you told him?" "I told him my night report was on record and contained everything I considered relevant to report." Marsh looked at me steadily. "Which is true. My honestly night report, as filed, contains what I determined was relevant. I made that determination myself, as is within my discretion as the duty guard." This is the specific, careful language of a man who has spent 19 years inside an institution and understands precisely how much weight each word carries. My night report contained an unexplained post-absence for 22 minutes. I attributed to a routine corridor check that revealed nothing of concern. My night report was, in its own way, a small masterpiece of accurate vagueness. "He pushed," I said. "He basically was polite," Marsh said. "Basically, very. The kind of polite that's designed to feel like a ceiling." "How did you respond?" "I told him that if there were specific matters the senior household wished me to clarify, I'd be happy to do so through the appropriate reporting channels at the request of my direct commanding officer." He paused. He left. The appropriate reporting channels, the direct commanding officer, the specific institutional architecture of a man who won't be moved by a ceiling, because he knows exactly which load-bearing walls the ceiling is resting on and has no intention of touching them. They're feeling around the edges," I said. "Yes. They don't know how much we know." Or they know exactly how much we know and they're establishing that we know it for the record before deciding what to do about it. He sat down in the chair across from my desk, which he hadn't done in our previous conversations. He had always stood the way a guard stands. Honestly, sir, I need to ask you something. Ask. The notebook page, with the names. I did not react. 19 years of institutional training on his part and 4 years of watching him on mine had produced between us a conversation style. That operated largely in what wasn't said, and he knew I'd removed the page before he asked, the same way he had known I was watching him in that corridor. "It's not you know here," I said. "Good." He looked at the desk surface, at the cold cup of tea that's, I accept, a permanent feature of any room I occupy for more than an hour, at the notebook, open to a half-filled page. "I need to tell you what I've done," he said, "because it is the kind of thing you should know, and because if it goes wrong, I'd rather you know about it than find out afterwards." He had contacted Charlotte, not directly. Marsh is a man of systems, and the system he used was, I want to give this the accuracy it deserves, elegant. Not elaborate. Elegant. The difference being that elaborate systems have many parts, and are therefore many places to fail, while elegant ones have the fewest necessary parts and work because each part is precisely the right shape. He had sent a letter. Physical, handwritten, sealed, sent through an internal household channel that's not digital, not logged electronically, and operates on a basis of trust so old that it predates the entire oversight infrastructure that I nominally represent. The actually channel is, essentially, a person, an elderly woman in the correspondence office, who has been sorting the household's private mail since before I was born, who maintains a discrete separation between correspondence that's official and correspondence that's personal, and who understands, in the way that people who have done a thing for 40 years understand it, precisely which is which. The letter contained two things, which the first was a confirmation. I found what you left, and it is still there. I'm the one who found it. The second was a question. Not the question of what Charlotte knew or what she wanted him to do. How the question was simpler, and in its simplicity cut to the exact center of what the situation required. "Are you ready, and ready for what?" I said. "For the vault to no longer be a secret," Marsh said. "The Crown's value in that room, as an argument, as a leverage point, as whatever the people in those meetings are afraid of, depends entirely on two things. That the Crown, I think, exists, and that the right people don't know it exists." He looked at me. "If Charlotte brings it into the open, formally, publicly, in the right forum with the right standing, then it can no longer be quietly removed, and the silence that protects the people in those meetings becomes the thing that exposes them. Because why would anyone be trying to quietly remove a crown that everyone knows about?" I sat with that. "She can do that," I said. "A 21st century princess can invoke a vault that's not on any plan, with a crown that's not on any public record, in a forum." "She's the Princess Royal's daughter," Marsh said, in the way you say a sentence that explains everything without requiring elaboration. He was right. He was entirely right. The specific, accumulated institutional weight of Charlotte's lineage was precisely the kind of thing that turns a technically inadmissible document into an admissible one, turns an unverifiable claim into a verified one, turns a secret vault into a matter of royal record simply by the act of a particular person standing up and saying, "I know this exists, and here's my witness." You know, her witness was Marsh. Her backup witness. The one who had written it all down, who had the names on a page kept somewhere that wasn't Windsor. Oh, who had the unsigned communication in his coat pocket, who had the second brass key, was me. "She's going to move," I said. "I believe so." "Do you know when?" "No." "Does she know the risk?" Marsh looked at me with the particular expression of a man being asked whether he has properly considered something he has done nothing but consider for 3 weeks. "She's been considering it," he said carefully, "since she was 14. The response came 11 days after Marsh sent his letter. He told me this at our next conversation with the specific, contained manner of a man reporting a fact rather than a development, though the development was inside the fact. Charlotte had replied. Her reply, which he showed me, on the same kind of paper her first letter had been written on, the same handwriting, slightly different now, 4 years older, contained only one word. To be fair, yes. I held that paper for longer than I should have. One word, and Charlotte's handwriting around it, and the memory of her at 14 writing, "I'm trusting you," to a stranger she hadn't met. The stranger had found her. She had said yes. I gave the paper back to Marsh, and he folded it and put it in his breast pocket, the inside one, the one that sits directly against the chest. I noticed this. I wrote it down later, not because it was strategically relevant, but because it was the kind of detail, the specific location of a piece of paper on a man's body, the deliberate geography of keeping something close, that tells you more about a person than any report. Here is what happened next, compressed into the account I'm able to give. There was a meeting. Plus, not that to be fair, the 3-person kind. A different meeting, differently arranged, called through a channel that no one in those 3-person meetings controlled. The forum, if I can call it that, was private, and I'm not at liberty to describe it precisely, and in any case, the description would require me to name people I'm not naming and identify a location I'm not identifying. What I'll say is that the forum had the necessary standing. What I'll say is that the crown was invoked, not displayed. The vault's existence was established, its contents described, its history documented. A guard of 19 years' immaculate service provided testimony. A lieutenant with 43 notebooks of recorded observations provided corroboration. A princess who had written a letter at 14 provided the standing. In the meetings, the 3-person kind did not resume. 2 of the 3 individuals involved have since moved to roles that are, in the institutional lexicon, lateral, a word that means what it sounds like it means, if you understand the vertical structures being referenced. The 3rd remains in place, which I note without comment, because the lack of comment is itself a kind of comment. And I'm, after all, a man who writes things down. Mrs. Patricia Veal continues her work at Windsor. She still takes a different route back to the service entrance every 3rd Tuesday. She passes the corridor, and she slows down, and she continues. I wrote for what it's worth, this down last Tuesday. I wrote it down the Tuesday before that. The brass key, the second one, the one that was left behind, is still in my coat pocket. I have thought about returning it. There's a logic to returning it. It is evidence, it belongs to an investigation, it should be in a properly sealed container in a properly labeled archive, not in the coat pocket of an oversight officer who's leaning toward finding the nearest W.H. Smith and buying his 44th notebook. But I haven't returned it. I'm still working out why, I think. And I write this with the understanding that it is the least institutional sentence I have ever committed to one of my notebooks, which is saying a good deal. I think I have kept it because it was lost by someone who shouldn't have been there, and found by me. And the finding of it is part of what happened. And what happened shouldn't be separated into its components and filed in separate archives where the individual pieces cannot speak to each other. Some, I guess, things only make sense as a whole. Some things only matter if someone keeps them together. Marsh retired this spring. The ceremony was the appropriate kind. A morning function in the guard room, the speeches appropriately short, the handshakes appropriately firm, the tea appropriately lukewarm. I was there. His wife was there. A quiet woman who shook my hand and looked at me with the expression of someone who knows they're looking at a person who has been part of something without knowing the specifics. I shook her hand and said something appropriate. I do well, not remember what. Marsh, in the moment before he left the guard room, turned back once. I do not know who he was looking at or for. And the room was full of people, uniforms and suits and ceremonial dress, and the particular Windsor atmosphere of formal occasion containing genuine feeling behind its formal face. He stood there for 3, perhaps 4 seconds. The set, in my opinion, of his shoulders was the same one I'd seen in the corridor outside the vault on November the 14th. Not parade ground correct. Held, concentrated. The stillness of a man who's making peace with something rather than achieving it. Then he walked out. I wrote it down. Charlotte was photographed again last month at 3 separate public engagements. I noticed on each occasion the same brooch. I think her grandmother's. The crown shape. I do not know if this means something. I have, on 4 separate evenings, sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open to a blank page and tried to determine whether it means something, and arrived each time at the same place. It might mean something or it might mean nothing, and the difference between those two possibilities is precisely the difference between a story that's over and one that has simply reached the end of a chapter. I have 44 notebooks now, which the 44th is already half full. The small room under Windsor is still there. The vault is still there. The crown is still in it, and the plaque is still beside the door, and Charlotte's letter is still on top of the case, and the combination is still known to 3 people, though the 3 people have changed. I'm one of them. Marsh sends me a message on the 1st of every month. The messages, I guess, contain nothing operational, a note about the weather, a brief remark about something in the news, once a photograph of a garden that I understand is his garden now, finally his own, after 19 years of standing in other people's spaces. The messages are, in their entirety, the correspondence of a retired man keeping a quiet connection alive. In my opinion, month's message, at the very end after the weather note and a remark about a program he had watched, he wrote, "She's moving again. Something to the east. I thought you'd want to know." I read it twice, plus, I wrote it down. I looked at the 44th notebook for a while. Then I picked up my pen and turned to the next page. There's no protocol like for what comes next. There are, however, 44 notebooks, and a key in my coat pocket, and, at somewhere to the east, a princess who wrote a letter at 14 to a stranger she trusted. She was right to.